On Worldview, the Indian Foreign Secretary becomes one of the only international officials to meet and shake hands with the military leader in Myanmar. 10 months after the coup, is India striking out on its own?
The Indian Foreign Secretary, Harsh Vardhan Shringla, is on a two-day visit to Myanmar. Now, this happens to be the first high-level outreach from India since the Myanmar military coup in February this year. The External Affairs Ministry said further in a statement that the two sides will discuss issues relating to humanitarian support to Myanmar, security and India-Myanmar border concerns, and the political situation in Myanmar will also be discussed.
In Myanmar's ruling junta has now declined India's request to meet the Foreign Secretary Harsh Vardhan Shringla and deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi.
Now remember, the country's military evicted the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi in a coup on February 1st.
Hello and welcome to Worldview at The Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar, as we take you through some of the reasons and possibly the compulsions behind the extraordinary move by New Delhi. Since the coup in February, General Min Aung Hlaing, or MAH as he is called, who became the leader or even calls himself the Prime Minister and Chairman of the State Administrative Council that overthrew the elected government, they have shown few signs that they might soften any of the actions taken. And remember, since February the 1st, and we had done one of our first episodes of Worldview on the coup in Myanmar, more than 1,000 civilian protesters have been killed in crackdowns on rallies and political parties after the Tamado, or what is the military in Myanmar, overturned the government and declared November 2020 elections invalid. Thousands are in prison, facing trials that are conducted by the military junta on a wide range of charges, and it's all done behind very closed doors, so not much is known until they actually pronounce those charges. Former President Win Myint and then 76-year-old state councillor and leader of the National League for Democracy (NLD), Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, that won re-elections, in fact was re-elected last November. They've already been sentenced to 4 years imprisonment, and they face trials on charges that could add as much as another 3 decades to their prison sentences. Despite appeals from many countries, UN Security Council statements, United States sanctions against officials, General MAH or Min Aung Hlaing has not backed down on any of these moves and also refused to let any foreign envoy or dignitary meet with Aung San Suu Kyi, as so many have requested. So what has India's position been, and particularly with this visit of Foreign Secretary Harsh Vardhan Shringla to Myanmar for 2 days? The first is that India has joined the international community, of course, asking for a restoration of democracy. But it issued a carefully worded, even stern statement over the conviction of Aung San Suu Kyi in December this year and those 4-year prison sentences, saying it was, quote, disturbed over the developments. The Ministry of External Affairs says India has aligned its position to that of ASEAN, the 10-nation Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that came out with a 5-point consensus earlier this year. And remember, much of that consensus they have not been able to actually hold to. But what is that 5-point consensus that is often spoken about when it comes to Myanmar and is backed by many countries, including India? The first is the immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar by all parties, it says, and the conduct of restraint. The second is a constructive dialogue amongst all the parties concerned. Third, that a special envoy of the ASEAN chair as a Secretary General shall facilitate the mediation. The fourth, that ASEAN will continue to provide humanitarian assistance, and this is significant because this is what India is doing too. And the fifth, a special envoy and a delegation will visit Myanmar to meet with all the parties concerned. So they've been able to meet once, but they have cancelled their latest visit. We'll tell you a bit more about that. So India has kept to that 5-point consensus. It has also kept up COVID aid during this period, sending vaccines to Myanmar, medical aid.
Foreign Secretary Shringla took another batch of 1 million vaccines
as well. In the United Nations Security Council, India actually voted on statements that criticized the actions of the military junta, but it abstained actually critically, from a resolution that sought to curb the free flow of arms into Myanmar. So the supply of arms to Myanmar, India was one of those countries that abstained from voting there. Meanwhile, India has kept up its diplomatic links. It even appointed a new ambassador to Yangon in November end, making it clear that it is not in any way downgrading its ties with its neighbor. And Indian companies, particularly PSUs like Bharat Electronics Limited or BEL, have reportedly continued some of their sensitive technical, technological, military cooperation and shipped radar components that help in coastal surveillance, amongst other such supplies. So the question is, how different was India's position when Foreign Secretary Shringla went there? Which other international officials have actually met with the military regime in Myanmar? Let's just take you through some of the international positions. While a number of Western countries have been in talks in some way with the Myanmar regime through their envoys based in Yangon and Naypyidaw, or maybe in other capitals, none have actually sent officials there. A US former diplomat was seen as an unofficial sort of envoy, Bill Richardson. He met with General Min Aung Hlaing in November. However, even as he met, the government was rolling out a series of new financial and visa restriction sanctions against the regime leaders and even regional leaders there in Myanmar. Many chief ministers have now been sanctioned. Then you look at Japan, and Japanese non-official peace ambassador Yohei Sasakawa also made the visit to Myanmar and met with the leadership. China, of course, very close ties with Myanmar, very deeply involved in Myanmar's infrastructure development as well, sent its special envoy Sung Ho-Xiang and the Chinese ambassador there. They have both met with General MAH, and although neither of them, when they asked, were allowed to meet the jailed leaders. So they also made a point of it, and China says it too stands with the ASEAN position. General Min Aung Hlaing was actually invited to one place, to Moscow, for a security conference this year. Over there, he met with State Security Council Secretary General Patrushev, but he did not meet with Vladimir Putin, the president, and they made that clear, even though he has now self-styled himself as the leader. And then you look at the ASEAN position, and we told you about the 5-point consensus. It normally maintains a neutral position on internal developments amongst its member countries, 10 member countries. But while envoys did meet with Min Aung Hlaing and other officials earlier this year, as we said, the ASEAN cancelled a visit after the regime refused a meeting with Aung San Suu Kyi. It also, very importantly, disinvited General Min Aung Hlaing from attending the ASEAN summit and the China-ASEAN meets in November this year, also the ASEAN-India meeting. Now, things might change next year as the ASEAN chair is changing. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen is taking a much more lenient view of the military rulers in Myanmar. And he's already met with the regime's foreign minister in Phnom Penh and has said now that he will actually visit Myanmar and bring the government, the fold, somehow back into the ASEAN meeting. So that's a very significant development to watch out for when it comes to ASEAN's dealings with the military rulership. And we're really looking at how they might or might not actually give it some kind of recognition. Clearly, the Foreign Secretary's move, Foreign Secretary Shringla's move to visit, is significantly different from the Western position. So now if you look at the two positions, it's definitely different from the Western position and maybe more in line with China, Russia, than even with the ASEAN. It is also significant that the Modi government sent the envoy despite the regime making it clear it turned down the request to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, who really has a very old, strong personal relationship with India. She's lived in India. She knows the leadership very well here. So the question is that given all of that and given this tough position taken by the Myanmar military, why is India reaching out to Myanmar? And we've spoken about some of these reasons before as well, but mainly 5 or 6 reasons why India is sticking to a slightly more independent policy when it comes to this issue. The first is India has built strong military links with the Tamadaw over the decades, and this is important because they reopened links after the 1990s when India really diplomatically sought to cut Myanmar out. India has now got several development projects, including the Kaladan multimodal road shipping network, It has other investments as well. In fact, over $1 billion committed by India to Myanmar makes it one of the region's heaviest donee of Indian aid. Now, many of these infrastructure development projects have slowed down in the past year. And then remember that plan by Adani Ports Group to develop the Alon port has in fact been cancelled. Adani has withdrawn from that deal, presumably due to the US sanctions that could hurt the company as well. The government says it is keen to work on others. Mr. Shringla, during his visit, made it a part of his statement as well. Remember, of course, India shares a 1,600-kilometer boundary with Myanmar. It seems hard to believe, but it's true. And therefore, the second reason why India is doing this is security is the foremost concern. This is what officials across the board have been saying. And in the past few months in particular, with the military occupied with its internal crackdown, many insurgent groups that target India along India's northeastern states have been able to take shelter along the border, across the border. In November, the ambush killing of Colonel Tripathi, Viplav Tripathi, and his wife, son, 4 Jawans of the Assam Rifles in Manipur is believed to have been carried out by 2 groups called the PLA and the Manipur Naga People's Front. And then those militants fled across the border to Myanmar. That's what's believed. Unconfirmed reports say some were later handed back to India by the Myanmarese leadership. But Mr. Shringla, who had last visited Myanmar in 2020, in fact, along with the Army Chief, General Narawane, has said that he very specifically discussed increasing border security coordination during his meetings there. Now, the third reason is that each time Myanmar has been isolated diplomatically, it is actually China that gains in the country. New Delhi would like to avoid ceding more space, even more space, in the neighborhood to China. Already, China has, since the coup, stepped the gas on about $7.5 billion worth of new projects as part of its China-Myanmar economic corridor off the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is definitely something that is on New Delhi's mind. Of course, India is deeply concerned about the future of the NLD, as well as Aung San Suu Kyi in particular, and hopes that if it keeps engaging with the Tamadaw, it may be able to convince them to release her, to restore democracy earlier than when the Tamadaw says it will in August 2023. The fifth reason is that the Modi government in particular is worried about the influx of refugees. This is almost now a national policy on stopping refugees from coming in, particularly Rohingya refugees that fled ethnic genocide by the Myanmar military in 2017. It has turned what many call a blind eye to the internal developments of Myanmar in the past as well. Prime Minister Modi, if you remember, visited Myanmar just months after the Rohingya crisis, didn't criticize the military action, even though Bangladesh had asked India to, or even refer to the Rohingya by name, just speaking about the crisis in the Rakhine state instead. And finally, and this is the sixth point, as a regional leader, India would like to stay relevant in Myanmar. And not just cut itself out from the conversation about Myanmar. The failure in ties with Pakistan has already led to a complete breakdown of the SARC process. So any idea to diplomatically isolate Myanmar could also have an impact on India's other regional initiative, which is BIMSTEC. As a result, unlike what we have seen in Afghanistan over the past few months, where New Delhi has closed its embassy and firmly shut the door on recognition for an illegitimate overthrow of the democratic government by the Taliban, here in Myanmar, the government has taken the opposite position. The Modi government, in fact, seems set on a course, particularly after this visit, that recognizes the military regime post the coup and is now trying to increase its engagement with it. This is certainly significant and a development we will continue to track for you in the new year as well. Here are some book recommendations, building on the ones that we've given you in the past. The first, of course, is author Tant Minh Tu, who's very, very famous, has written many books now, The Hidden History of Burma, Race, Capitalism, and the Crisis of Democracy in the 21st Century. Very precipient book. Also, his previous book, where China meets India, really is very important on Myanmar. Then there's Negin Pao Kipken, who's written Democratization of Myanmar, as well as a book called Myanmar, A Political History. Then there is Bertel Lintner, and you can read his analysis in the Asia Times, very important analysis. This book that he has written is his latest, called The War of Myanmar and China's Quest for Global Dominance. A previous book called Great Game East also deals with what is happening inside Myanmar when it comes to this great game with China. Then there is a book by an Indian author who traveled through, called Myanmar in the World, Journeys Through a Changing Burma, really talking about all that has happened over the past decade over there. And then two important books really on the Rohingya crisis and what Myanmar has done. One called Myanmar's Enemy Within, Buddhist Violence and the Making of a Muslim Other by Francis Wade, and the other by another journalist called The Shadows of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi and the Persecution of the Rohingya by Poppy McPherson. We certainly hope you find the reading interesting and you join us again here on Worldview from the team here. Thanks for watching.